guys, it's Angela, and today I'm going to be telling you about all the books I read during the month of April. So April was a really good reading month for me. I actually read a total of 16 books, which broke down to a total page count of 6,323 pages, which I'm really happy with. In terms of ratings, I also think I had a really good reading month. So for 5-star books, I had 4 5-star books, 5 4-star books, 5 3-star books, and then 2 books that I didn't rate because I read them for school. So as per usual, I'm going to start with the lowest ratings and then work my way up to the 5-star, and then I'll leave the 2 books I read for school until the end. So let's get into it. So starting with the 3-star books, the first book I have is Mockingjay by Suzanne Collins. Now, for me, a 3-star rating isn't a bad rating. It's just like a middle-of-the-road book, and that's how I felt about this book. This is the 3rd book in the Hunger Games trilogy, and for some context, I gave the Hunger Games 5 stars and Catching Fire 5 stars. So Mockingjay got 3. I just didn't feel like it lived up to the other 2 books. I don't know, I still liked it and I thought it was a good book, but I just didn't enjoy it as much. And I don't want to get into like why necessarily because I don't want to be spoilery, but this was my first time reading this trilogy and overall I really enjoyed reading it. One thing I will say that like really angered me with this book was there was a character death in here that I feel like just didn't need to happen. There was no reason that this one specific character had to die the way they did, in the scene they did, when they did. I don't know, I'm really late to the game with these books because, like I said, I'm just reading them for the first time. But yeah, a character in here died and I was just real pissed about it and I'm still really bitter. But overall, I thought it was a good, solid conclusion to a fantastic trilogy. There's definitely some changes I guess I would want to make in this book, but overall I did enjoy it. My next 3-star book is the 3rd bind-up of Death Note. This has volumes 5 and 6 in it, and I gave this 3 stars. I gave the first 4 volumes in this series 4 stars, but I gave this book 3 stars because I just felt it was a lot slower than the other ones, and I sort of found myself kind of bored at times. This manga series follows this guy named Light who finds this notebook called the Death Notebook, and basically you write someone's name into the notebook and they die. So he sort of gets a power trip because now he has the power to kill anybody, and it's sort of, that's what the series is about. It's definitely morally gray and I do enjoy it, but I just didn't love this volume or these 2 volumes as much as I loved the other ones. My next 3-star book is Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin. Now, this book is quite polarizing. There's people who absolutely love it, and then there's people who like hate it. And so it's like, it's a really big thing. And personally, I feel I fall somewhere right in the middle. Like I said, I gave this book 3 stars. This book is about this girl who's a witch and she gets bound to a witch hunter, and like in holy matrimony, like they get married. And this book has sort of a hate to love romance, and he doesn't know that she's a witch, obviously, or else why would he marry her if he's a witch hunter? So that's sort of what this book is about. Overall, I did enjoy it, and I enjoyed the second half of the book more than the first half. And with that being said, I think I'm going to enjoy the sequel more than I enjoyed this book just based on that second half alone. I mean, there were certain like problematic elements in this book, and then just like in the beginning, I really didn't like the main character because she was just like obnoxious. Like she was super obnoxious to the point that I found her annoying. But she does experience a lot of character development and growth throughout the course of this book, and I really liked the way that her character grew, and by the end of the story, I did like the person that she became. So I feel like that sort of obnoxiousness was like part of her character development, and so without it, she wouldn't have developed as much. But yeah, overall, I did enjoy this book. I do see the criticism and I do see the praise, and so I definitely fall right in the middle. The next 3-star books I have are both thrillers, and the first is The Lying Game by Ruth Ware. And if Honestly, I'm really fuzzy with this book because I read it in the beginning of the month and it's the middle of May right now, so it feels like forever. But it's about this group of girls and it's told in a dual timeline, and they're like four best friends and they went to school by this like special like little boarding school by the ocean, and now it's currently present day, and our main character, whose name I've honestly forgotten, has like moved on. She's living somewhere in the United Kingdom. She's got a husband and a child and she's just doing her own thing, and she hasn't heard from these four girls since they went to school together, and you don't know why. But she gets a call from one of the girls saying, "I need you," and she packs up everything, grabs her child, tells her husband like, "I gotta go," and she goes to this girl's house on the coast by where their school was. And then the other three girls kind of get together, and it's just basically figuring out this mystery. Someone is dead and you don't know who, and it's definitely a slower paced book. And honestly, I feel like that description I just gave you of the book was absolute garbage, so I'm sorry for that. Sometimes describing thrillers is hard, so the less you know the better, and I definitely feel the same with this book. I did give it 3 stars. I thought it was good. I thought it was solid. One of the plot twists like did get me. There was an end scene that was very like intense and high-paced, fast-paced, and did have me on the edge of my seat. But other than that, I'd say it was just a pretty middle-of-the-road thriller. I did listen to this book on audio, and I've said it before and I'll say it again. I recommend listening to all of Ruth Ware's books on audio if you do like audiobooks, because they're all narrated by this woman named Imogen Church, and she has this lovely English accent, and I feel like her narration is just so phenomenal. So because parts of this book were slow and I was listening to it on audio and I just like Imogen Church's voice in general, I feel like it like wasn't that bad and it didn't drag that much for me because I listened to it on audio. But yeah, I gave it 3 stars. It's definitely not Turn of the Key. And my last 3-star book is You Are Not Alone by Greer Hendricks and Sarah Pekkanen. And I read this for Kayla from the channel's Books and Lala's Literally Dead book club. And like I said, I gave it 3 stars. This book follows a woman who witnesses another woman actually commit suicide. I think she jumps onto the train tracks. And after that, she becomes really interested in her life. And so she like goes by her apartment and leaves flowers and goes to the service, and she just becomes really interested. And then some friends of the girl who committed suicide become interested in the main character, whose name I have forgotten. And yeah, that's basically all I'm gonna say about that. It was quite interesting. I did listen to it on audio. It was a little slow at times, but I personally didn't mind that. There were some things that were a bit predictable, but there were also some plot twists that really did get me. And overall, it was good. It was a solid 3-star read. So now into my 5 4-star books. So sticking with thrillers, I'm going to start off with my 2 4-star thrillers. And the first is Emma in the Night by Wendy Walker. And this is about 2 girls who go missing and one comes back. And it's basically about the girl that comes back trying to find out what happened to her sister Emma, and her parents are obviously very confused because they both went missing at the same time and now only one of them is back. It was a really good psychological thriller, and I would definitely say if you're interested in psychology, like if you're a psychology major or if you're just interested in psychology in general, I would definitely pick this book up because of the psychological elements that are in it, the way that people are examined and analyzed. I just found that to be extremely interesting. Honestly, all of the plot twists that happened in this book, I did not see coming. I was blown away. I listened to it on audio. It was really fast, and overall, I really enjoyed it and definitely want to pick up a hard copy. The next book I read was Where They Found Her by Kimberly McCreight. And I honestly had no intention of picking this book up. In April, I was just laying in my bed and I had a migraine and it was too early to go to bed. It was like 6 o'clock. So I decided that I would put on an audiobook for a little bit before I went to bed. So I put this audiobook on, and I listened to it all in one sitting. So I started it at 6 p.m. and finished it at like 11 p.m. I listened to it on double speed. Yeah, so I mean, if that's an indicator, it was really, really good. Now, this story is very intricate. So basically, you're following the perspective of 4 different women, which in the beginning was not difficult, but like a little bit confusing. Like, I kept having to like stop and like put together the pieces and understand like, okay, this is who this is and this is who that is. But like I said, I did listen to it on audio, and all of the narrators were different, so that did help. Where They Found Her follows the story of this town, and in this town, a baby has recently been found dead in the woods. So right off the bat, this is definitely not an easy read. There are definitely a lot of trigger warnings in this. Of course, a death of a baby. Another is a miscarriage. And one of the main perspectives in which we follow is Molly. And Molly is a freelance journalist who actually had a miscarriage, I think, a year prior. And now she's here on the scene for this dead baby. So it's obviously very hard for her. And this book sort of gave me like Big Little Lies vibes, because you are following the perspectives of these 4 women and everyone is intertwined. Like, in the end, everything makes sense. This thriller was so well thought out, and it was just so intricate and just well done, and it just honestly blew me away how in the end the connections between certain characters were made, and it honestly was so amazing, and I would highly recommend it. And this is another book that I've read during the month of April that I do want to own. My next 4-star book is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. And I do own this book, and I did read it physically with my eyeballs, but from when I read it to now, I have misplaced it. Haven't gone anywhere, obviously, so it's somewhere in my house, but I don't know where it is. But yes, this is a classic novel about a dystopian society where women are valued for their ability to bear children. And overall, I found this book to be very, very fascinating. I really enjoyed it. I think it's Hulu that has a TV special about it. TV special, oh my goodness, I sound like my grandmother. A television series about it. So I'm really excited to watch the adaptation, but I overall really did enjoy the book. Next we have House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas, which I gave 4 stars. My goodness, this thing is thick. And if I'm being quite honest with you, I don't think it needed to be as long as it was. It was info dumpy at times, which I understand that it's an adult fantasy, but also I felt like it didn't have to be as info dumpy at times as it was. I don't know, those are just 2 of my main like gripes with this novel, and the reason it got a 4 as opposed to a 5. But overall, I did really enjoy this, and I think it's a very solid start to a series that I'm interested to continue. And this book follows Bryce and Hunt is a fallen angel, and Bryce is half fae, and they are trying to solve the murders of paranormal creatures, I guess you could call them, within where they live. So I really liked the mystery aspect. This romance is sort of like an enemies to lovers, hate to love thing, which I also really enjoyed. I enjoyed the tension between Bryce and Hunt and the other side characters as well. The ending was super fast. Like, the beginning is slow, and then it picks up, and then the last 200 pages are like really, really quick. So overall, I really enjoyed this, and I'm excited to pick up the second book. And the last 4-star book we have is Catherine House by Elizabeth Thomas, and honestly, this is not a 4-star. This is more of a 4.5, maybe honestly even 5. I don't know, I just can't stop thinking about this book. So I did read it via NetGalley in April, and on May 12th it released, and of course I got a final copy because I loved it so much. So this is an adult mystery novel with a lot of like gothic elements, and it's about this girl named Inez who attends this school in rural Pennsylvania called the Catherine House. And basically, you go to the Catherine House for 3 years, and while you're there, you have no communication with the outside at all. Like, not even like television or anything like that. Like, you don't even bring your personal belongings. You're completely separated from everyone else. And the students who attend this school are very intelligent, and they have a lot like going for them. So not just anyone goes to this school. Like, the interview process is extremely extensive, and being here is a big deal. And so it's sort of like the pitch with this book is like you kind of have to give yourself to the Catherine House in order to get something out of it. And so by giving yourself to the Catherine House, you're completely isolating yourself from pretty much the entire world for 3 years. And this book follows all 3 years at the Catherine House, and oh my goodness, this is one of the weirdest books I've ever read, and I loved it so much for that. This is extremely dark, extremely gothic, extremely atmospheric. It's definitely a slower paced book, but around the 50% mark, it really starts to pick up. And there's a mystery that runs through the entirety of this book. So if you pick this book up thinking it's going to be like a fast-paced mystery thriller, you'll probably be disappointed because it's not necessarily fast-paced, but there's obviously a huge mystery within it. Before even picking up this book, I had no idea that it was going to be so diverse. This book features all sorts of characters with all different ethnicities. The author of this book, this is her debut novel, is a person of color author, and I believe the main character is also a person of color, and I really enjoyed the diversity within this book. There are some very weird and beautiful quotes I've pulled from this book. As soon as it's released, which is obviously now, I do want to reread it because I feel like there's bits of like foreshadowing, and I just love this book so much. I have a whole review on Goodreads, which I'll link down below if you're interested in more of my thoughts. And I would definitely pick this book up and support this new author and this wildly weird story. And now on to my 4 5-star books. So sticking with that dark academia theme that was in the Catherine House, now we have The Secret History by Donna Tartt, which is another dark academic novel. I listened to this on audio, and it was actually narrated by Donna Tartt, and I really enjoyed it. This book is definitely a slower paced book, and it's very in-depth and philosophical, and there's a lot going on here. But ever since I finished this book, I could not stop thinking about it. It was amazing. It blew me away. I understand all of the hype that surrounds this book. I want to own this book as soon as I possibly can. I want to tab this book and annotate it. It was so good, and I understand why everyone is so obsessed with it. So I don't want to talk about the synopsis too much because I feel like it's better like just not knowing going in. But this book does follow a group of students at this school, and they're all really interested in Greek and philosophy and stuff like that, which was interesting for me because I was taking philosophy while I was reading this book. And they're very intelligent people, and at the beginning of the book, you know, one of them ends up dead. And yeah, that's what it's about, and I loved it, and if you haven't already read it, I would highly recommend it. So the next 2 5-star books I have are both new adult romances, and the first is The Deal by Elle Kennedy. And before talking about this book, I will say the disclaimer that this book does talk about rape because the main character of this book has been raped. So just know that going into it. And we follow this girl who wants to impress this guy. And so she sort of gets into a fake dating relationship with this hockey player. And I love a good sports romance, so I really enjoyed that element. And I just loved this book so much. It was so good. Definitely something that I want to reread. And during this time, I've found that like just quick new adult romances are so good to read and just take your mind off of everything that's going on. So yes, I gave this book 5 stars, and then I proceeded to buy the other 3 on my Kindle, so I will be reading them soon. And the second 5-star new adult romance book I have is Scandalous by L.J. Shen, and this is the 3rd book in the Sinners of Saint series, and it's definitely my favorite, and I loved it so much. The relationship in this book is an age gap, so I was sort of nervous to read that because usually it kind of makes me uncomfortable, but it didn't. This book was just amazing, and the couple is an enemies to lovers, and this book was so just emotional. Like, I was so emotional when I read this book. The guy in this book, Trent, does have a daughter who is mute because of some things that happened when she was very young. She does not talk. And the girl in this book starts working for him, and they hate each other, but she starts to develop a bond with Trent's daughter, Luna. And it was one of the sweetest things I've ever seen, and it made me cry so much, and it was just so beautiful. Also, this book was so diverse, and it had a lot of representation I wasn't expecting, including epilepsy and cerebral palsy. And the cerebral palsy representation in this book was so phenomenal, and it made me cry so much. I've mentioned before on my channel, I do have cerebral palsy, and this is the second time I think that I've seen it in a book, and it was just so beautifully done, and it was just amazing. And I like how LJ Shen has incorporated so much diversity into this series and chronic illnesses and stuff like that. And yeah, I loved this book. And my last 5-star book was The Tea Dragon Society by Katie O'Neill. And this book was so beautiful, so diverse. There's also, I mean, you can tell from the cover that it's diverse, but there's also a character in a wheelchair in this book. The artwork was stunning. And this is a cute little fantasy book about dragons. It's only like 80 pages long, so it's a really quick read. And it's the first in a series, and I can't wait to pick up the second book. This was so cute, and I would highly recommend it. And finally, I'm going to be talking about the 2 books I read for school that I did not rate. The first is Paradise by Toni Morrison. I'm really dumb, and I never bought this at the beginning of the semester. And then I remembered that I had to read it for a class. And so then I was like, oh, I'll order it on Amazon. It's fine. I have Amazon Prime. Well, we're in a pandemic, so obviously. So when I needed to order it, it wouldn't have been here in time. So I paid like $15 for this on Amazon to buy it like as an ebook, which sucked, but it was whatever. And then with Audible, I got the audiobook too, which I listened to on triple speed because I was on a time crunch. And let me tell you, listening to an audiobook at triple speed, it really hits different. Anywho, this book is by Toni Morrison, who I've mentioned before was a professor at my college and is very respected, and this is the second book I've read by her this semester. And like all of other Toni Morrison's books, it's incredibly dark, and I don't even know how to begin to describe this book. It deals with 2 towns, and there's so many messages within this book. You know, a lot of racial discourse as per all of the rest of her books. There's also a coven in this book, which I found to be incredibly interesting. And yeah, I don't even know how to describe it, but it was wild. It was a wild book. I've never read a book with so many different characters. I was confused for the first portion of the book. I had no idea what was happening, but overall, I did end up really enjoying it. And the second book I read was Kindred by Octavia Butler, and this is actually the first science fiction novel that was ever written by an African American woman to be published. And I read this for my slave narrative class, and this deals with this woman who suddenly has the ability to time travel, and she's living in like the 80s, and she's an African American woman, and she unexpectedly time travels though. Like, she doesn't like plan it, like it just happens. Basically, she time travels when this boy in the past who is related to her gets hurt. His name is Rufus, and she has to like go and basically help him. And he lives several hundreds of years before, and his father is a slave owner. So every time this woman time travels, being a black woman, she travels back to this time where slavery still exists. So she becomes essentially a slave. And the whole like time traveling aspect, I don't really know how to explain it, but it's quite interesting because she gets like stuck there and then she comes back. And then her husband, Kevin, who is a white man, ends up being next to her when Rufus gets hurt and she gets transported back to the past. And so then Kevin, a white man married to this black woman, gets transported back into the past, and it's just all about like slavery and the 2 time differences. And I thought it was really interesting, and I was like really excited to read the first ever science fiction novel published by an African American author, and overall I enjoyed it. So those were all of the 16 books that I read during the month of April. I honestly haven't filmed in so long, I feel like I've forgotten how. But I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and I hope that April was a great reading month for you. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and have a good one.